Hi YouTube, welcome back to my channel for yet another instalment of my constant reader journey through the complete works of Stephen King. Today, episode 11, we're going to be talking about the final novella in the Different Seasons collection, and that is The Breathing Method. While you're here, please consider subscribing, especially if you love Stephen King as much as I do. Now, on to The Breathing Method. This story, in a word, bananas, but in the best way. Like, it's so different to the other three stories in this collection, and so it would be easy to take it for granted. Not only does it have the added challenge of having to close the anthology, and it's come after three iconic stories, Shawshank, Apt Pupil, The Body. It has to close with the shortest length of any of the four stories, and it's a subject matter that feels nothing like the previous three. I feel as though Stephen King did this on purpose. He sort of lowers your expectations so that when we do get to the breathing method, it really sort of takes the wind out of us from like the sheer scope of its craziness, especially since the novellas are not in the order that they were written. So The Body was actually written first. He wrote it straight after Salem's Lot. So the order that we get in Different Seasons does not reflect how they were written. There was like a deliberate pacing to it. So I actually think King is sort of trying to build up to the breathing method as a sort of like coup de grace. Or you could sort of interpret it as like a return to form, since it's the most conventional horror of the four. It's, what his agent was afraid he would sort of be pigeonholed into as a genre writer. Ironically, though, King has talked about how he propositioned Different Seasons to his editor in between Cujo and Christine as this sort of compilation piece of like gritty reality stories to show that he was more than just like a horror one trick. And it would be like a refreshing departure for, his fans. But his editor insisted that at least one of the four stories had to be horror relevant, and so I think that's where the breathing method comes in. It manages to balance out this very experimental book for King with something that's more familiar to his audience, something that's more in keeping with his repertoire. So we've gone from Hope Springs Eternal with Shawshank to the Summer of Corruption with Apt Pupil to the Fall from Innocence in The Body, and then story number 4 has the very cryptic subtitle of The Winter's Tale, no relation to Shakespeare or the David Essex song, but I appreciate how, right from the name, we can already tell it's going to be the weird outcast of the group, And King dedicates this story to Peter Straub, so we expect something horrifying. It starts, our main character, David, is an older lawyer. He's sort of approaching retirement age. He's in need of an activity, something he can spend time with friends on as he's getting older. Through a colleague at work, David is invited to visit the club, a sort of gentleman's congregation at the library on 249B East 35th Street, so New York. A place for men to sort of chat, read, play games, but most importantly, tell stories. And there's like a fireplace. The club motto reads, "It is the tale, not he who tells it," which I think is a fun tie-in to the rest of Different Seasons, because storytelling has been a bit of a running theme through all 4 installments. The club has a lot of mystery surrounding it. There are shelves of books with no record of ever being published by writers that David has never even heard of, and when he looks into them, they seemingly don't exist. The club has this labyrinthine design where David doesn't want to explore too far into the building out of fear that he'll quite simply never find his way back out. And I like that the secrets of the club are never revealed. And they're not actually what the story's about, they're just a bit of sort of spice to add to it. Like, David investigates the cryptic origins of the club, and he fails, and he lies to his wife about the nature of his visits. I've been told that this club makes a reprise in the short story The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands, so I'm very excited to see how the club develops when I get to Skeleton Crew, which is the anthology that's in. Some fans have speculated that the club is actually located inside the Dark Tower, because it has this seemingly endless corridor of doors that could potentially lead to other worlds. I can't really comment. I haven't started the Dark Tower yet, so I know nothing about it. I do think King was very ahead of his time in the way that he drops these little Easter eggs in his works. You know, a lot of writers, they put out books in isolation, and instead his sort of combine into this tapestry that only gets richer the more of his stuff that you've read. And I really appreciate that, because it makes sure that you never get bored with his stuff. The story then goes full Wuthering Heights. We get a cheeky embedded narrative. The rest of the story is told through Dr. Emmeline McCarran. It's Christmas Eve. He has a rather macabre and upsetting tale about a former patient. Now, as a medical student, I have a lot of bias towards this story because I love medical horror. Hospitals, scary place. Pregnancy, very traumatic experience. So I won't exaggerate when I tell you that I was eating this story up. It takes place in the 1930s. Sandra Stansfield is a very headstrong young woman. She's pregnant with an illegitimate child. There's no father there to sort of support her. She's used to people sort of turning their noses up at her, even though she has no control over her living situation. Even the receptionist at the doctor's has reservations about her. So she uses the alias Jane Smith, although the doctor quickly sees through that. He's very taken, Dr. McCarran, by her steely resolve to have this baby, even though society judges her for it and she has no stable income. McCarran really strikes up a good friendship with Sandra. He talks about her sort of hazel eyes in such a way that the club ask if he ever actually loved her, to which he says, you know, he didn't, but he could have. He was sort of on the cusp of falling in love with her. The story that he tells is very short, but very sort of punchy. Like, it doesn't drag. There's a twist ending that really knocks you for six. I think it helps that McCarran and Stansfield, they have a very sweet relationship that sort of wavers between happy rom-com or platonic lifelong friendship. Because you could criticise McCarran for being like the typical male saviour, but it's very progressive when this book, even when it was released in the 80s, to show a single mother be supported for her decision to keep the baby and go through with it is actually really refreshing. And it's cool how King knows you might be suspecting like an Ira Levin style plot twist where Stansfield is actually part of some sort of demon cult and the baby's an offering. And so when the plot doesn't do that and instead makes a very hard left into a different realm of crazy, it's twice as effective. So McCarran encourages Sandra to learn the breathing method so that when she does go into labour, she'll essentially be able to put herself through childbirth. And this has unexpected consequences. When she goes into labour, she books a taxi and she's sort of going through the breathing like practices while in the taxi, but then it crashes and Sandra is decapitated. Now, conveniently, the taxi is crashed just outside the hospital, so McCarran finds her body and he's horrified to discover that she is still alive. I guess through sheer force of will, her severed head is still performing the breathing method while her lungs are still pumping air through her windpipe several feet away. Now, I love that because doctors see some crazy shit, McCarran just rolls with the punches. He realises he can still save the baby, and so he quite quickly gets over, you know, the craziness of her being alive with a severed head. Upon delivering the baby, it's a boy, it's alive and healthy. He tells Sandra, she mouths like a final thank you before dying. She doesn't really say it properly because she is a severed head. McCarran pays for her burial because the poor woman had no one. She was even having to like use a fake wedding ring so that she could rent a flat and get a job on the pretense of being a widow because nobody wanted to employ or House, a Single Mother. So really it's a very touching story about feminism and the determination of a woman to bring a child into the world on her own, despite what people around her might think about that. And I appreciate the symbolism of her like losing her head, you know, the way that society sort of disregards a woman's thoughts and feelings in her head and are happy for her to just carry on as this breeding machine that she's reduced to. You know, it's very emphatic, it's very sort of dramatic. McCarran follows the boy's life. He's approaching 45. He's a successful college professor. He has his mother's hazel eyes. It's a very sweet tribute to Sandra and how she managed to leave like a piece of her self like in the world. You know, she continues to live through her son. I think that The Breathing Method is a firecracker of a story. It deserves a lot more praise. Like, I'm pleased that there are talks about making a film version of it, because it's the only one in Different Seasons that doesn't have a film. It was announced in 2019 though, so they are taking their time with it. This story won a British Fantasy Award. It was nominated for a World Fantasy Award. I don't know why people sleep on it. I think this is great. Does it have the X factor of the other 3 stories in Different Seasons? Maybe not. But for me, I think that makes it stand out even more so, because it's like the lovable weirdo of the collection, and it really plays with what you think it's going to be like. So truly, go ahead, read The Breathing Method. I think it's a delight. It's fantastic, and it's a great way to end Different Seasons, which is maybe Stephen King's best anthology work to date. Thank you for watching, and as always, toodaloo.